So yes, Azeem Rafiq. I don't follow cricket, so before now, I had quite literally no idea who Azeem Rafiq was, but I've taken an interest in this story because of the scale of the claims that are being made. So if we get the first clip up here, he's an ex-cricketer who spent most of his career playing for Yorkshire Cricket Club, and he's been recently standing before the Digital Culture, Media and Sports Select Committee to argue not only that the club are institutionally racist, but that institutional racism pervades throughout all of English cricket. And he's been quoted to have said that modern cricket does not represent modern Britain. And as already said, this is all extremely new to me. But let's roll back to see how this all started. And the context of this is rather sad to start with.
Just as a disclaimer as well, before today, I had also not heard of Azeem Rafiq. Just to ask a question, in the process of doing your research for this, did you find any indicators to Azeem's quality as a cricket player? Because I always find it's the ones who maybe are not the best players who always try to make a stink about things and call up the institutionally racist card just to try and boost their own profile.
And do what they can to perhaps, I don't know, sell an idea to Netflix that may actually be quite profitable. So yes, it does seem to be the rather average sports personalities or sports people.
Yeah, it's the Kaepernick play.
Yes, who do seem to be going down this path. But it does seem that Rafiq has some reason to be disgruntled by his treatment, as I'll proceed to explain. Him and his wife went through a stillbirth in 2018. And
I feel bad now.
His suspicions of institutional racism were first raised in that year when Rafiq accused the club of treating him badly following the stillbirth. In September 2020, this is sometime after, Yorkshire Cricket Club announced that they'd be carrying out a formal investigation into the claims. Yes, it's here. And that the chairman, Roger Hutton, would be leading it. Rafiq participated in the internal inquiry, offering verbal and written statements. And through these statements, he expanded on his initial allegations about racist language being used, giving specific examples as well. This applied to both employees of Yorkshire Cricket Club and its supporters, whom Rafiq claimed sustained a hostile culture which isolated Muslim players at the club and offered insufficient support for the development of younger Asian players. It's a bit weird that the younger Asian players bit has been added at the end, because this same claim has been made about the FA, and it almost seems too systematic a response. It
seems like something you just keep in your back pocket. Oh, it's also affecting the young people, by the way, don't you know?
It does feel like it's being framed as a systemic issue already. But anyway, being unsatisfied with the club's response, Rafiq began an employment tribunal claim against them in the hope that the claim would lead to them bringing about meaningful change within cricket. And this took place in June 2021, and it failed to reach a resolution. Now, it's reported that Rafiq was offered a six-figure sum dependent on him signing a non-disclosure agreement, but he rejected the offer. And some sort of inquiry has since been called, and after further reflecting on his experience at the club, he's now providing the select committee with evidence that the club is institutionally racist, as with, English cricket in its entirety.
Okay, well, I'm interested as to where he's going, because once again, not being much of a cricket fan, I'm not particularly familiar with the internal politics and the people within that industry, so I'm interested to see where this is going, although whenever I hear claims of institutional or systemic racism,
of course,
it does put me a little bit on the back foot in terms of I'm sort of prone to not believe somebody without some pretty significant evidence.
It does, when you or me both. I mean, whenever you have a lone case that someone is trying to present as an expression of a totalistic systemic problem, I'm immediately going to be slightly suspicious, and for good reason.
If you're presenting a big problem, then you're going to need strong evidence to support it, as far as I'm concerned. And also, if he did go through any bad treatment from his colleagues and fellow players within the club as a result of him going through a stillbirth, of course, that is terrible.
Of course.
That is awful, but that's not necessarily evidence of a wider systemic problem.
No, it's not. And from what we've seen, at least so far, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're being horrible to you because of your race immediately.
Yeah, like they could just maybe not like you. As bad as that as bad as that could be for someone on an individual level, it might not just be your race. It might just be they just don't like you.
Yeah, I mean, at the moment, it sounds like a suspicion, and one that may have led to him making kind of a too broad a conclusion of it. I mean, we saw this, we've seen this with football many times. I think Sol Campbell, funny enough, Sol Campbell's actually a conservative, but he's made a lot of noise about the lack of black managers in English football, and immediately rendered, or maybe not rendered isn't the best word, diagnosed this as a systemic problem, when in order to surely know if it's a systemic problem, you need to have a look at the process which is leading to less black managers. You
need to look at the system, and if there's nothing inherent in the system that says that it must, we're only hiring white coaches or something, and you're going to need to find some pretty strong evidence.
You can't make a systemic accusation of actually looking at the process of that system. This is what we have to argue constantly with leftists, because they just want to look at the disproportionate outcome and call oppression.
I believe the classic term is the racism of the gaps. It's a extension of the God of the gap. Well, it's adjacent to the God of the gaps argument that was made by religious people back in the day, which is you see a gap that you cannot fill logically, or at least maybe haven't looked into to find something that would logically fill that gap, and you fill it with God. These people, they find any disparity, they don't look into it any further than a racial disparity and go, it must be racism.
Yeah, and it's just myopic, isn't it?
Oh yes. It's a very, very cynical worldview to be operating from.
Well, let's move on to Azeem Rafiq's particular case. So if we can get the next one up, please, John. So to give a summary of his own testimony, which can be seen if you scroll a little bit further down. He summarised it as follows: that the culture of institutional racism prevented him from realising his dream of playing for England. He claimed that racist language, including terms aimed at his him and at his Pakistani heritage, were used constantly, never stamped out during his time at Yorkshire. He was outraged by the report's conclusion that the terms were used in a banterous context, when in his view it was explicitly racist. We having engaged in banter ourselves, it's a very, very, shall we say, acquired sense of humour.
If you're going to be hanging around in large groups of men, dodgy as that opening statement sounds, you're going to have to get used to taking a joke. You kind of got to understand that you'll have to take it on the chin. And if it's amongst friends, I think that, or at least people who consider you a friend, that opens up the goalposts for harsher and harsher jokes that will go into more and more taboo territory, purely on the basis of you and I are friends, we trust one another, there is a rapport that we have built there.
Exactly.
Therefore, I trust you to be able to take this and understand that this is not personal.
Yeah, and the words, the meaning of the word effectively changes in that context. Yeah, quite literally.
It's basically male bonding.
It is.
That's what we do. We just make fun of each other in the
what happens ways. If you go to another locker room and act in exactly the same way as if it's universally accepted?
Well, if it's people you don't know.
Or people you don't know, it can be taken very, very differently. Yeah.
You need to build that rapport with somebody before you can engage in such a way.
You do. But Rafiq felt isolated and humiliated when these comments were made by others in front of him. And the coaching staff made them as well. And apparently no one stepped forward to challenge the people saying this. I have no idea whether he maybe stuck up for himself at some point and perhaps just asked for someone else to weigh in, or whether he kept silent completely. We're of course speculating on this.
Obviously, this is all going on behind closed doors and private. So
but he basically said that language such as this has become the norm, and people at the club just didn't seem to think that it was wrong, and that he was in denial about the scale of the problem during most of his first spell of Yorkshire up to about 2014. He returned to the club in 2016, believing things had ultimately changed.
Oh, see, I could take a joke back in 2014, but now. Intersectionalism has taught me to become very sensitive about everything.
You see, this part of it, I'm kind of I'm suspending judgment because again,
let's get into it.
Only on the banter point.
Okay.
For the simple reason that it's doing banter badly doesn't. I don't accept that using banter badly is immediately racist.
Oh yeah,
it's got to correspond to the intention.
You could have just misjudged a joke.
Yeah, you could. Yeah. I mean, this part, however, is genuinely really bad, which I'm going to go into now. In Rafiq's view, the atmosphere became toxic after Gary Banners took over as captain later that year. This is 2016, shortly after the former batter Andrew Gale replaced Jason Gillespie as head coach, when Rafiq returned in the belief that the culture had changed. He actually said that at age 16, when he was a practicing Muslim, I imagine he still is, he was pinned down by a senior player at his local cricket club, and red wine was shoved into his mouth.
Okay.
I mean, regardless if you're a Muslim, doing that to a 15-year-old is disgusting, isn't
that's really cruel and very unnecessary.
Yeah. But he said he didn't drink alcohol again until around 2012, which he did just to fit in with the club. And he said that the report that was conducted into the allegations that he reported was extremely shoddy. The panel failed to speak to any clear witnesses. And, well, he proceeds from here to explain his treatment by the club after the death of his son, which is in the video which we're going to get up now. And, well, it's it makes for pretty uncomfortable viewing if we just play this now.
End of 2017, we had a really difficult pregnancy. And through that time, the treatment that I received from some of the club officials was inhuman. They weren't really bothered about the fact that I was at training one day and I get a phone call to say there's no heartbeat. I raised that complaint about Tim Bresnan, and Tim, former England cricketer, also related to the coach. I knew there was potentially going to be real trouble, but I thought, I mean, everyone complained, so it would be the same for everyone. But on the flip side of it, the board minutes say I'm a problem, a troublemaker, and an issue that needs to be resolved. And I feel that then blinded them into how they treated me through the pregnancy and the loss of my son. My first day back after losing my son, Martin Moxon literally got me in a room and ripped the shreds off me. I've never seen him speak to anyone like that through my time at the club.
Now, Moxon is not someone that only Rafiq complained about. He was complained about by several of the players.
Oh, okay. Well, that adds some weight to what he's discussing there.
Yeah, exactly. And about 6 or 7 players apparently. Bresnan, not Moxon. Bresnan was the one who was complained about. And 6 or 7 players complained about him. And the only person who actually received repercussions for that was Azeem Rafiq, according to his testimony.
Okay.
I mean, you can see where he's joining the dots here and thinking that.
Yeah, I can understand, but when he's talking about ripped to shreds and all those sorts of that kind of language, it's very vague without definitive claims or statements of what was said, or obviously without footage. It's very, very difficult for me to be able to make a judgment on this, purely because of the fact that obviously what happened to him and his wife was horrible. You'd be in a heightened state of emotions after something like that has happened. You might be in a position where you may take things more sensitively, but if he did say some awful things to him at the same time, that's not very kind to do to somebody who's supposed to be a teammate. So once again, the vagueness of the fact that I don't know what was said makes it difficult for me to...
The one thing that we can tell, I mean, even if we take racism out of this, is that there is something of a hostile, weird culture at this
it doesn't sound
club.
great. If there are multiple complaints being made about the same people are accusing each other of tearing each other to shreds. I mean, if you're talking about a sports team, this does not sound conducive to a sports team that are going to work well together. Yeah, well,
regrettably, as I'm going to show now, Azeem Rafiq has actually turned out to be something, well, a part of this very problem that he's criticising. So if we get this article up here, was actually found in 2011 when he kind of claimed that this all started. That he basically was found to have been sending anti-Semitic messages, not to Jewish people, but amongst his cohort, amongst his friends. And if we scroll down a little bit, we can actually see the messaging, which isn't. It's a little bit further down, but this is the apology. The apology that he sent. Yeah, it's this one here. I'm not going to read it out because it's pretty. I think just self-explanatory, really.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just going to say that I'm not surprised given his background.
Yeah, you could bring that up, and you wouldn't, and it's not illegitimate to do so. But this language to me is just as bad as everything he's been criticising.
No, I mean,
it's not directed at an actual Jewish person, but it's.
And reasonably speaking, he was making vague claims about what other people were saying about him. He's making slightly more direct claims in these. So
yeah, so I'm afraid. I mean, of course, I don't know whether he completely forgot about this or not, because it was a long time ago. I forget about some things I have done and said 10 years ago. But if he knew that he had said this, it seems a little bit egregious that he's been, of course, going along with the narrative of victimhood this whole time, whilst knowing that he's been a part of this institutional problem.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you wanted to make the claim that something is institutionally so-and-so or so-and-so, I would say that you need to look at the behavior of the people within that to determine whether the system or institution leans one way or the other. And if the system's made up of people making lots of funny remarks about Jewish people, then you could make those sorts of claims. But once again, I mean, this seems a little bit like a case of digging up somebody's tweet or by the looks of it here, Facebook comment history and dragging them over the coals.
It does a bit.
Dragging them over the coals for it, which is not something I'm, typically in support of.
No, I don't want to bash him too much because he's genuinely been through a lot. But if what he's saying about the club's reaction or the lack of a reaction to his to the stillbirth is true, that they basically just told him to get on with it and suck it up, that's absolutely heartless. But
I mean, he should. If that's what happened, he should have been given time off, because I do believe that. I mean, just from the sake of a performance perspective, that's not going to leave you in the position where you can perform very well.
Yeah. Well, I guess the big question really is, I mean, is there a political motivation behind this? I mean, is he? I mean, I'm not. We're not, of course, saying that these things didn't happen, because he seems sincere enough in his testimony for us to believe that of course he's being sincere. But do you not think that there may be political forces at play here? And I say this because, well, he's using his personal experience to make a broader case that cricket is racist in its entirety, rather than limiting his description appropriately to where he experienced it at Yorkshire Cricket Club.
Yes.
And well, as mentioned earlier, he's brought the concept of demographic representation into this as well through the statements, modern cricket does not represent like modern Britain.
Well, yeah.
And that is if he means represent in that way, but once I imagine the language might have been carefully used.
If you're going to make these systemic claims, these institutional-wide claims, but you've only got the evidence of one particular club behaving in that way, then you can't make the claim that it is institutional, because you do not have the evidence to back that up.
Yeah. I mean, there isn't enough evidence to suggest that cricket in its entirety, for me, from what we've seen, is institutionally racist. I mean, what he experienced probably does sound racist to me, if I'm honest. And I know that the English Cricket Board's failure to sufficiently address this is bad, but that in itself is not enough to suggest that English cricket in its entirety is institutionally racist.
Well, I mean, I'm just gonna say that if it's banter between friends, if you are good enough friends, racist jokes should not be off the table, because they can be hilarious.
No, they should not. And maybe I was wrong in saying that then, because maybe it's just a matter of.
I mean, obviously, there's a time and a place. Maybe don't throw them out immediately after the man and his wife have suffered through a stillbirth. But if he's making these incredibly wide claims, but you can only point to certain examples from a very specific period of time where he was in a heightened emotional state, while at the same time it seems that he might get some publicity off of the back of it, which is something that we've seen with a number of other sports stars. It makes me very inherently skeptical.
Yeah,
but not to diminish what he and his wife obviously went through.
No, I think we can't ignore the fact that there have been many attempts, and there will continue to be coercive attempts to find institutional racism everywhere, even in areas where it is not, and. So for that reason, I think it seems like plausible that there is a problem with Yorkshire Cricket Club of some sort, but it's a little bit egregious to make that claim to English cricket in its entirety.
If you enjoyed that segment from the podcast Lotus Eaters, you can catch us live 1 p.m. UK time on our website. And if you'd like more from us, you can also subscribe to find some of our premium content.
Yeah, we actually have absolutely loads on there now, because we're over a year old at this point. So we've got a massive library of content that you can't find anywhere else, such as our regular series, which are Contemplations and Epochs. Contemplations, we have philosophical and scientific discussions, and in Epochs, we have long, in-depth conversations about things that happen in history. This is one we did recently about the Nika riots, the absolutely brutal Nika riots in Constantinople. I really enjoyed doing myself. But we also have we also have loads of expert articles from people who know what they're talking about, such as this one talking about the misnomer of postmodern neo-Marxism. You may well remember Jordan Peterson getting castigated by left-wing activists for using the phrase. Well, it is a bit of a misnomer, but Thomas happens to be an expert in this subject, and so he takes you through it. And as you can see, there is a silver and gold tier member audio track that goes along with it. So if you don't want to have to read it, you can just listen to it instead. But we also have a bunch of premium podcasts that we can't really host on YouTube because of editorial guidelines, shall we say, such as Harry doing this excellent one, What Happened to the January 6th Rioters, and another one, in fact, that Harry and myself did about a whistleblower from a German public broadcaster talking about the COVID coverage and the particularly engineered narrative in which they can't talk about certain things. And so this leaves a bunch of questions up in the air, and we explore that. Again, editorial guidelines mean we can't really host that elsewhere. We also have a bunch of really excellent interviews. I did one recently with a chap called Philip Tanzer. He's if you're a men's rights activist, you may have heard of him because he comes out of that space, but he's also an ex-gay porn star who's turned conservative activist who has some very interesting opinions.
Very interesting trajectory to take.
Yeah, it's the sort of person you're probably not going to meet in your regular life, but he's a fascinating guy. He's a really nice chap. And also, follow us on alternative media because, of course, we want to break the stranglehold of Silicon Valley over everything that we do. And this means that follow us on platforms like Ghetto, where you can follow Lotus_com to get all the latest updates from us. And also, we are speaking, or I am speaking, at a conference hosted by Ghetto at the London O2, the Indigo section of the London O2 on December the 8th. I'll be speaking there as it's part of the Counterculture Conference, where we're talking about why what is happening to the West is happening and what we can do about it. So part of that is following us on Getter and coming and see us, and of course, subscribe because that keeps everything running.